Welcome to Headstones and Microphones Founder Stories, where we use AI to step into the past through a researched first-person simulation of history's most visionary founders. I am your host, Calvin. While we've added some creative storytelling, our goal is to inspire your own study of these trailblazers. Now, let's meet our guest. Today we are talking to a man who completely revolutionized the way the world eats breakfast. He took a simple, accidental kitchen mistake and turned it into a global empire, changing our morning routines forever. Please welcome the legendary founder of the Kellogg Company, Mr. W.K. Kellogg. Will, it is an absolute honor to have you on the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Calvin.
We are thrilled to have you. Let's dive right into your incredible journey. When you first conceived of your business, the world was a very different place. What was the exact moment you realized society was moving in a direction only you could see? And how did you convince the early skeptics?
Well, Calvin, back in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, people were used to heavy breakfasts, heavy meats, greasy foods, or cold, thick porridges that took ages to prepare. Working at the Battle Creek Sanitarium, I saw firsthand that people wanted something lighter and healthier, but it also needed to be convenient. The exact moment for me was when I realized that our flaked corn cereal shouldn't just be a restrictive health food hidden away in a sanitarium catalog for patients. Society was speeding up, and everyday people needed a quick, ready-to-eat breakfast. The biggest skeptic I had to convince was actually my own brother, Dr. John Harvey Kellogg. He wanted to keep our creation strictly as a health food. I had to convince him, and the early grocers, by showing them that the everyday public deserved a delicious, wholesome, and crunchy start to their day. I knew the world was ready to eat breakfast out of a box, even if my own family couldn't see it yet.
That is incredible. It really takes a unique vision to see past the status quo like that. Speaking of taking a risk, leaving behind safety to build something entirely unproven is a massive gamble. What did your life look like the day you decided to go all in? And what was the core belief that gave you the courage to take that first step?
Oh, it was a terrifying day, Calvin. I was 46 years old. Most men at that age are looking towards stability, not launching a risky startup. For over 20 years, I had worked in the shadow of my brother at the sanitarium, working long, grueling hours for very little pay, essentially acting as his bookkeeper and manager. I didn't have a vast personal fortune. When I finally decided to break away in 1906 and start the Battle Creek Toasted Corn Flake Company, I was risking the security of my family. But the core belief that gave me courage was absolute faith in the product. I had spent years perfecting that flaking process. I knew with every fiber of my being that if I could just get a box of our toasted corn flakes into the hands of the average American housewife, the quality would speak for itself. That belief was my anchor.
46 years old and starting over. That is the definition of a leap of faith. And it clearly paid off. In the absolute beginning, when you had no data, no capital, and no blueprint, what was the one truth you held onto that everyone else around you dismissed?
The single truth I held onto was the power of commercial advertising and branding. Back then, people thought it was foolish to spend massive amounts of money telling people what to eat. My brother thought commercialization was vulgar, but I knew that if we didn't tell our own story, someone else would. I insisted on putting my own signature, W.K. Kellogg, right on the front of every single box. People dismissed it as vanity, but I knew it was about accountability and trust. I wanted the world to know that this specific recipe was the genuine article, because there were dozens of imitators popping up in Battle Creek, trying to steal our thunder.
You were a marketing genius ahead of your time, Will. But I know it wasn't all smooth sailing. Long before your company became a household name, you hit a wall where everything nearly collapsed. Take us back to that first major failure. What went wrong, and how did you find the willpower to restart?
That happened in July of 1907, just about a year after we started. Our business was growing beautifully, and we could barely keep up with the demand. Then, a catastrophic fire tore through our main factory and burned it right to the ground. In an instant, our production hit zero. It looked like the end of the line. But I refused to let that fire consume our future. While the ashes were practically still warm, I looked at the blueprint for a new, much larger, fireproof factory. I found the willpower by focusing entirely on the workers and the momentum we had built. We didn't stop. We advertised even harder during the rebuild, telling folks to hold on because we'd be back soon. That setback taught me that a building can burn, but a vision cannot.
What a powerful lesson. You just refuse to give up. Now, innovation often looks like madness to contemporaries. Was there a specific product, philosophy, or strategy you were utterly convinced would work, but the public initially rejected or ridiculed? How did you respond?
It was my philosophy on adding a touch of sugar to the cornflakes. In the early days of development at the sanitarium, everything was strictly bland to fit my brother's medical theories. When I proposed adding just a bit of sweet malt flavoring to the cornflakes to make them appeal to the broader public's palate, it was viewed as a terrible mistake by health purists. They thought it ruined the integrity of a health food. But I responded by trusting the consumer. I knew that a healthy breakfast didn't have to taste like cardboard to be good for you. I stood my ground, added the flavor, and the explosive sales proved that the public agreed with my instinct.
Trusting the customer is always a winning strategy. Still, behind the legendary name was a human being facing immense pressure, whether from financial panics, internal betrayal, or personal doubt. How did you shoulder that burden without letting the vision splinter?
It was an immense weight, Calvin. I was a quiet, private man, and I suffered from terrible eyesight from my youth, which always made me feel a bit isolated. The pressure of competing with copycats, including a former sanitarium patient named C.W. Post, who observed our secrets and built a massive business from them, was deeply stressful. I shouldered that burden by throwing myself into the operational details. I focused on making our packaging better, ensuring our grains were fresher, and keeping my head down. I also found solace in hard work. When you are focused on serving the people who rely on you for their livelihood, you don't have time to let your own doubts splinter the foundation.
That focus is exactly what separates the legends from the rest. Let's talk about the people who helped you get there. Who were the very first people, beyond your immediate family, to buy into what you were doing? How did you convince early workers or customers to trust an entirely unproven concept?
The very first true believers were the original 44 employees I hired when I opened the doors of the Toasted Corn Flake Company in 1906. To convince them to trust this unproven venture, I didn't offer them empty promises. I offered them a standard of mutual respect. I treated them well and made sure they knew they were part of a grand experiment. For our early customers, the grocery distributors, I convinced them by creating unprecedented demand. I ran an ad in Ladies' Home Journal asking housewives to give their grocers a wink if they wanted Kellogg's Corn Flakes. Suddenly, customers were demanding it, and the grocers had no choice but to buy into what we were doing.
That wink campaign is legendary. Can you take us to the exact moment where you felt the momentum shift? What was the specific milestone, contract, or breakthrough where you realized we aren't just going to survive, we are going to change everything?
The definitive tipping point for me was when we achieved the milestone of shipping 175,000 cases of cornflakes in our very first year. Seeing those train carloads of cereal pulling out of Battle Creek, packed to the brim with boxes bearing my signature, was the moment the reality caught up to the dream. I remember looking at the shipping logs and realizing we weren't just a local operation anymore. We were transforming the American breakfast table.
You certainly did. And you didn't just build a company, you built a distinct culture and philosophy that outlasted you. In the early days, when it was just a handful of people in a room, how did you instill that standard of excellence or service?
I instilled it through absolute meticulousness. I was known to be very strict about cleanliness and efficiency in the plant. I walked the floors constantly. If a machine wasn't running perfectly, or if a package wasn't sealed tight, it wasn't acceptable. I told my early crew that our name was on that box, and that meant our personal word was inside it. But I balanced that strictness with care. I believed that if I invested in my people, they would invest their best efforts into the product.
That leads perfectly into my next question. History books often flatten a person's life into a neat, polished narrative. What is the biggest misconception people have about your journey, your character, or how your company was actually built?
Many people think that because I became a successful industrialist, I was naturally a confident, outgoing tycoon from day one. The truth is, I carried a heavy sense of inferiority for a long time. In my youth, because of my undiagnosed nearsightedness, people thought I was dim-witted and told me I would never amount to anything. I spent the first half of my life feeling undervalued. My success didn't come from a place of grand confidence. It came from quiet, stubborn persistence and a refusal to let those early labels define what I could achieve.
That is incredibly moving, Will. Thank you for sharing that. Building an empire always requires a steep personal cost, though. Looking back at the entirety of your life, what was the hardest sacrifice you had to make for the sake of your vision? And was it ultimately worth it?
The hardest sacrifice was undoubtedly the permanent strain and eventual estrangement between myself and my brother John. Our business differences led to years of painful legal battles over the rights to the Kellogg name. It cast a long shadow over our family. To lose that brotherly bond was a heavy price to pay. Yet, when I look at what we built, the millions of families we provided a wholesome breakfast for, the thousands of workers we supported through the Great Depression by implementing 4 6-hour shifts to keep people employed, and the children helped by the foundation I established, I have to say it was worth it. I wanted to invest my money in people, and the business allowed me to do that on a scale I never could have imagined as a boy selling brooms.
What an extraordinary legacy of giving back. Before we wrap up, if you could send a single sentence back through time to yourself on the very first day you started this venture, knowing every trial, triumph, and heartbreak that awaited you, what would you say?
I would tell myself, Will, do not be afraid of the shadows or the skeptics. For a quiet man with an honest product and an unwavering purpose can move the world.
That is beautiful. Will, do you have any closing remarks about the interview or the stories you shared today that you would like to share with our listeners before we sign off?
I just want to encourage everyone listening to never let anyone else dictate your worth or your potential. It is never too late to start something meaningful. Thank you from the bottom of my heart, Calvin, for this wonderful conversation and for allowing me to visit with your audience today. It has been a true privilege.
The privilege was entirely ours, Will. Thank you so much for stepping into the studio with us. What an amazing conversation with W.K. Kellogg, a man who overcame personal doubt, family rivalry, and literal fires to build a household name that stands for quality and philanthropy. And that wraps up another conversation from Beyond the Grave. Thanks for joining us on the Headstones and Microphones podcast, Founder Stories. Remember, legends may die, but their stories never do. Please help spread the word by sharing and following the pod.